Hello and welcome to the Outcast. I'm your host HC, and with me is.
Wolf.
And today we have a very special guest. She's been on the show before, but now she's not here to discuss things with us. We are putting her on a pedestal and are going to ask her questions. So introduce yourself.
Hi, my name's Priya Sridhar. You've probably heard me on the chat before, talking about games, about shows, and about actors. And
Mm-hmm.
alas, I do not have any hot takes to take today because I have a new book out, Understudies, from Hooray
Yeah.
Publishing.
So as mentioned, Priya here has a new book out, and since she's a really good author and she's also a very dear friend, we decided, you know what? Let's ask her some questions in honor of the new book. So, Priya, are you ready?
Yep, I am ready.
All right then. So, Wolf, you get the first question
Ooh.
because I'm humble like that.
Yeah. Absolutely. Definitely. Tell us a bit about yourself and what you do.
First thing, what I definitely do every day is I definitely write, but I'm a writer and a copywriter in my day job. And I also volunteer for Toastmasters and my local writing group. So I juggle a lot of hats. But I really enjoy writing and analyzing speculative fiction
Hmm.
because I think there's a lot of potential in escapist fiction and how it brings us joy, especially when the world is chaotic. And I also enjoy hanging with my friends and drawing comics. Animation is one of my passions, as well as the Marvel movies, which I know is not popular right now to say you're into Marvel, but to be fair, I'm into it for the representation and the good stories.
Mhm,
And so, for
mhm.
the record, Marvel, can you go back to releasing one movie every couple of years? It works
Yes.
perfect there.
Agreed.
Mhm.
Too many. Slow it down.
Never forget Love and Thunder.
Which was good up until the last 20 minutes. It just
Yeah.
it did not have that ending. It might have stuck the landing.
hmm Well then, so now that people at home know you and what you do, so you are mostly a writer, as we established. Like you're a copywriter at day, writing stuff at night. You have a new book out. So what got you into writing?
Probably what got me into writing was my mom cutting off television access when I was a kid. Because due to being the baby of the family, I was allowed to watch a lot of television as a kid, mainly what was on public channels because we didn't have cable, which fostered a lot of my love for PBS and science at the time. Because I enjoyed watching Bill Nye and Kretz Creatures along with Arthur and the Magic School Bus and getting into Matilda. But then fourth grade, mom was like, you can't watch television every day. And I also found out the program I was doing, a gifted program in an elementary school, was doing accelerated reading programs on the computer. You could take quizzes on books. And for some reason, I got into Redwall at the time, and something happened. A flip switched, and I started reading. I also got into Harry Potter before J.K. Rowling revealed herself. I got into Bruce Coville and the works. And then I read Harriet the Spy by Louise Fitzhugh, and I was in that phase where I wanted to imitate what kids did in books. But usually that involved figure skating or gymnastics, something not feasible if you're in South Florida for the most part. But in Harriet the Spy, Harriet goes around writing thoughts into a notebook, and I realized that was something I could do. And that was sort of an epiphany. I started doing that. I started carrying around notebooks, and I started trying to write. Not very well, obviously, but I realized that I enjoyed doing it, and I kept it up. And I even started submitting at a young age, getting both forms and personal rejections, some that were nicer than others. And the man who eventually published me, Tyree, sent one of my favorite rejection letters when I sent a depressing story about a dead astronaut to a magazine he wrote about the joy of space travel, and he said, I don't think it'll inspire our readers. And I just laughed because I'm like, yeah, that's fair. One of the funniest rejection letters I've got. And Tyree and I still keep in touch. We're part of a critique group, and he recently asked me to revise a story I submitted to group to send it in for publication. He also published Understudies as part of her race.
Mhm. So shout out to Tyree. You know, in a sense, he is the reason this is happening. So yay.
Indeed, yay.
All right. So, anything else about your writing history, or shall we move on to the next question?
Well, I do have 7 other books out. This is book number 8. They include several horror novellas, a 4-book children's series, and a YA science fiction glittery dystopia. And if you want any of those, just I'll put the links in for after the
They'll
podcast.
be below the video.
Yeah. Yeah, they'll be right in the description. And
Go buy
as
them
someone
all.
who's
I
and
didn't.
as someone who read a lot of the stuff she writes, even the unpublished stuff, you want to read them.
Thank you.
I didn't know you wrote a lot of these. I'm gonna have to go and pick some of them up and read them. It's gonna be
All
fun.
right. Thank you.
Yes, you should.
I
And-
do want to go back a little bit. You know, you talked a little bit about writing speculative fiction and like analyzing speculative fiction. What's that like a little bit, if you don't mind sharing?
Well, speculative fiction is basically an umbrella term for
Hmm.
any story with a fantastic element in it. So, fantasy, horror, science fiction, and all the genres in between. And the
Mhm.
reason why I analyze speculative fiction is partly because English soon became one of my favorite classes and the best ones.
Mhm.
And I find, in addition to the stuff you learn, one of my teachers introduced us to Ray Bradbury and to The Most Dangerous Game, to all these stories that have fantastical elements but also reflect bits of our world. For example, The Giver, like you could say, The Giver is a dystopia about a world that has no feelings or color, is there, but it also gets you to think, okay, it's a world where people were dissatisfied with the world they had, a world where you have to choose your job, which in this case would involve sending your resume and hoping that you get accepted when you're job hunting in 2019.
Mhm.
Obviously, nothing personal. Or having to decide if you're ready to be a parent, if you can handle the sleepless nights, or if you can handle fandom talks about ships, and if you can stay out of it because you're like, we're all grown up here. Shouldn't it matter that the show just exists and we're happy to have it with the representation?
Mm.
Yeah.
Something tells me I know what you're talking about, but let's not get into that at the moment.
Yeah. It's basically, well, it's more than one show, which shows how fandom can be.
Mm.
And the reason why I like analyzing speculative fiction is because I feel there are ways you can look at building blocks. And you can receive not just the time period where someone came from, but also what they think the future would be or their present. For example, Ray Bradbury wrote a story called The Veldt, which I think is his best one, about a house that does everything for a family, from brushing their teeth to doing their own paintings for leisure time, and they can even take rocket ships to New York. But it's about how this playroom is like a VR deck from Star Trek, and it starts not working properly. But the kids get obsessed with the African savannah and lions eating something. And it eventually comes to the conclusion that the house has replaced the parents because it can provide everything and it doesn't have the power to say no. And I thought that was interesting, the way, because I think Ray Bradbury didn't like kids that much, modern kids. And he talked about how it's very easy to become complacent. And obviously, that both did and didn't happen. Fortunately, VR has not progressed to that level
Yet.
yet. And also, fortunately, kids, as far as we know, don't have the power to become as monstrous as the little monsters in the story become. But it's interesting to see his views on technology, how it's something that you have to be aware of if it'll replace the hard work of the manual labor. And I think that was something that formed my opinion for a while. And Bradbury, as he described it, he was just sitting down, trying to type out one short story a day on a typewriter, because this was before computers. And he said this is just what came out of him. So it's interesting to think that came from his subconscious and where that comes from. Or if you look at modern fiction, if you think of, say, Shannon McGuire's Every Heart a Door, which I got into after sitting on a panel with her, so big fan squeak. And that story is basically, what if the magical doors and portal fantasies displaced the protagonist, so they were no longer the heroes, but back in the real world and having to deal with normal life, where no one believes them, and years actually may have passed. They got older, or they're left with curses, and it's about all these kids sent to a school of kids like them, and having to deal with the trauma of being displaced. For a lot of those who want to return to that magical world, but they don't know how, or in some cases they can't return ever. And so I think about how it talks about the theory of displacement. And for me, I related it recently in an article about J.K. Rowling, how it's a great analogy for when a fantasy world betrays you, that there's a story that you grew up with and comforted you, and you have to make that decision. Can you separate the art from the artist in this case? Are you complicit by talking about this media? Is it better to ignore it or to address the elephant in the room? Is negative attention good attention? And this all came out in the light of Hogwarts Legacy and a lot of the nonsense that I saw coming out of it, some of which was affecting my friends and some of which wasn't. But at some point, I realized I had to take a stand after seeing that a trans YouTuber was affected by the fact that the author opened her big mouth and sicked people on
That
the
just to, I know this is a very annoying topic and everything, but let's try and not throw shade just for the sake of this is a whole other debate. You
right,
know?
but basically, I made that analogy about what do you do when your magical world has betrayed you, and so there are all types of building blocks you can see in both modern and in the building people who you could consider the founders, and how those viewpoints may have changed. And I'm not completely good at it. I recommend my friend Charles Payseur, who does this for a living. He analyzes speculative fiction in short story and novel form, and he also really liked Offstage Offerings, the first book of this. So he's very insightful, and I totally recommend you go read his stuff on Quick Sip Reviews, and I'll include the link for that as well.
Sure.
So if you're ready for the next question, so you've written both short stories and novellas as like understudies. So is there any difference in the mindset you approach a short story and how you approach a full-on book?
It's a difference of adrenaline, focus, and time. Because a short story, at most, will take several hours or a few days to write the first draft. And then, depending on your process, if you're under a lot of time pressure and sending it off super fast to meet a deadline, which I did for a few years because I was running on adrenaline, which was not a good idea, not something I recommend unless you absolutely are blocked and you want to get stories in.
That's today's tips, by the way. Do not walk over solely on adrenaline. Very important.
Do not, because it will drain you. It will drain you lots just to write on adrenaline.
Mm-hmm. So anyway, you were saying?
But anyway, and writing a novella requires more time and thinking, because people will know if you wrote a novella in a rush. And the problem is you need to take more time to think about it. And there's a reason why National Novel Writing Month, or NaNoWriMo, is a thing, to encourage people to get that book out and to focus on nothing but the book. But the problem is I don't often have that focus, so that's why I tend to gravitate more towards short stories. In the case of understudies, I had written Offstage Offerings, and I tentatively pitched some sequel ideas to the editor at the time, to Eddie Generous at Unnerving Press, and he chose one. And as a result, this was the idea I went with, writing it over 2 months and then rewriting it in October. So it definitely requires just time to slow down and to think, and you have more plot threads and themes to go about. Because a short story will generally have one thread, the main conflict and resolution and character development. A novella will probably have several plots running, and same for a novel. And so as a result, you need to think more and to focus.
That's fair enough. And just kind of continuing off from that, would you say that you find short stories overall easier than a novella, or is it or does the idea determine that?
I think it depends on the idea, because I've written short stories that are stinkers, and I've written some novellas, which one I'm currently writing in progress and sharing with my friends. They keep saying, but what happens next? Which is basically, if you want to make a writer happy, ask them that question when they're talking about a story. What happens next? And so the difference, while I do write more short stories than novellas because of focus, I think it does depend on the idea. I have the novella curse, which is a few times when I write a short story, my mentor, Terry Lee Ralph, would say, oh, could this be a novel or a novella? And that's actually where my first book Carousel came from. It started as a short story inspired by orchestra, and then she asked, could it be a novella? And she's asked this a few times, like for one work that I'm shopping around Shatterglass. I'm like, dang it. It's like, if I had a nickel for every time someone told me to expand a short story into a novella or a novel, I'd probably have 15 cents, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it's happened 3 times, to quote the meme.
Aha, I understood that reference.
I feel better though because author Bruce Coville said the same thing happens to him. He wrote the Magic Shop series, and he was only intending to do a short story anthology about a shop where kids can go in and go in and find magical objects that improve their lives. And he said each time without fail, when he started on a short story, it would always become longer, and he'd have to turn it into a book. So that short story collection has not happened. My favorite book from the series, Jeremy Thatcher Dragon Hatcher, started as a short story called The Dragon's Egg. And he said it just kept getting longer and longer, which no surprise because it has dragons in it. And in this case, a baby dragon that drinks milk. And because the kids' parents are veterinarians, jokes about eating the guinea pigs that are in for clinical checkups. And so, but he said he has this problem as well, that he has a hard time writing short stories. Terry Pratchett, rest in peace, has the same issue. You can see that his short stories aren't as polished as his novels, because there's a lot he wants to say, but he can't because of the restrictions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, depends on the idea, basically.
Yep.
Wolf, you have the next question.
Yeah. How would you describe your writing style? Is it something you tend to, is there like certain themes or ideas that tend to follow you from book to book, or do you try to do your best to change it up every time you write a new story?
I think there are things that do come up that change it up, and I actually didn't notice until I asked Charles if he could read some of my fiction and do a spotlight blog on it, and he actually agreed. He noticed that one recurring theme was the idea of yellow wallpaper, which comes from the Charlotte Perkins Gilman short story, The Yellow Wallpaper, of a woman who is convinced when she's sick that she sees something behind the wallpaper in her bedroom and tries to peel it off. So the idea that a protagonist can see something that no one else can and has to handle it precisely because no one else will. And also stories about dealing with a situation that's uncontrollable, that traps you, and how you escape from it. And in this case, he was referring to a short story I wrote about an old one trapped in a teenage boy's body and trying to find a way to return to the stars, as to leave his mortal body, and to return to being a cosmic being.
Interesting. Very interesting. I like that idea.
Very interesting indeed. And I just want to say kind of an off the record note because it kind of relates to her writing style. I was like a week ago I was playing Metroid Fusion, and the writing style for the main character like reminded me of her writing so much. So I'm just saying, Nintendo, if the Mario movie goes well and you want to make a Metroid movie, hire Priya. She got it.
Thank you. Do hire me because scripts apparently pay well in Hollywood.
Yeah, so again, if you ever want to get that Metroid movie, get her. You won't regret it, trust me. Anyway, next question after the self-promotion is over. So, what's your biggest writing challenge and how do you overcome it? I think I know the answer.
Focus and overcommitting to projects because I have a bit of that problem. Because there was a while I was working for a content mill a few years ago, which required submitting about 15 articles a month. And when I signed up for it, I thought, it's fine, I'm just doing this as a job. And if it doesn't work out, it's no skin off my nose. But it did instill that adrenaline that you want to get everything finished, but as a result, it means that you can get easily distracted by different anthology calls and challenges, as well as pitches, because I also pitched to nonfiction. I actually just signed the contract and sent in edits for a piece on Saturday, which I'm so happy about and will be out in April. But as a result, it means it's constant juggling and balance, and when you're juggling, it's very easy to drop balls. So one thing I've been told is actually write less, which is easier said than done. It's only when you're told not to write that you realize you want to write. and vice versa when you actually do have to meet a deadline. And what helps is doing body doubling, which is a technique of having an accountability partner in the same boat as you, also trying to write. And on Discord, what I do is I set up sprints with people, timed writing sessions, and we try to get stuff done. Because even if there's a day where there's no useful writing, I can at least say I've tried. And the other person usually does get something out of it. And I do that on my support group as well as for my local NaNoWriMo group every Sunday.
I can attest. She's committed to those things. If you have a problem writing, she's your girl.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, anything else you want to add about how you overcome those weaknesses, or do you want to move on?
One thing that helps is to have a trusted support system for which you can talk things out. And this is a lot easier with the internet now, fortunately, because when I wasn't finding online communities, I was trying to ask my English teachers if they could read short stories. And they would start, but then they'd kind of brush me off. And I annoyed my siblings by asking them to read stuff. And something I don't ask them now because they're both doctors and super busy. So as a result, I found my people online. And you can do this in various ways. Goodreads has places where you can start critique groups or writers groups if you just want moral support. And websites like Dream Foundry also have discords where you can build little communities or find them with people that you trust. But trust is the important thing, because if you have one negative person or one person that just wants to see the world burn, it can easily disrupt the community and your writing. So keep an eye out for someone who's overly negative or just being a bit of a jackass, because when you're with those people, they will kill your creativity. And that's why the trust is important. And obviously, vice versa. You don't want to be that person. If you're going to provide critique, make sure it's always with kindness, because the goal is to help people become better rather than point out what's wrong. Or if they
Absolutely.
need emotional support, to provide that. And since Camp NaNoWriMo, the summer camp version, is starting April 1st, next Saturday, this is especially important. If you're on the NaNoWriMo website, you can find support in the forums and even a local group if you want to write in person or virtually in your area. And it's international, so you can even find groups as far as Australia or in Israel.
Well, then I'm glad you have your support groups, because that's very important. All right, so Wolf, you have the next question.
Yeah. What is your favorite topic or genre, or theme to write about or write in?
I admit I like writing stories that are in YA or middle grade the best, because I feel what I found is when reviewing children's books versus adult books is children's literature has a sense of wonder to it, of what is possible. And it doesn't matter what the topic is, whether it's about finding treasure in an area with poisonous coral, or if it's mice learning to play ballet. You get a sense of this is possible, this is awesome. And that's why I became a fan of the How to Train Your Dragon books. And I may argue that overall the series is better than the movie trilogy, something that Harel and I disagree about.
Well, Wolf here, I think, is on your side regarding the books are better than the movies. But then again, this is a matter of, honestly, it's a matter of opinion.
I mean, hey, you're allowed to be wrong. It's okay.
But you're wrong. Priya is okay. You're the one that's wrong.
Would it help if I said David Tennant, aka the Doctor, narrates the audiobooks?
I know he does. It's just a matter of I only read 3 and I need to get to the other 9, and I don't have a lot. I have a big backlog, people.
I'm saying audiobooks because you could listen to it while doing chores and such.
Yeah, but then again, I'm too busy focusing on the chores, and then I go from hiccup and toothless went out to play to suddenly the world is burning. Wait, what?
I get it. I'm like,
yeah.
I have a harder time with audiobooks too. So I just try to find some time to sit down and read when I get the chance.
Fair enough.
So yeah, so for the question.
Anyway, I enjoy writing speculative fiction the most, so I'm currently going out of my comfort zone. Because I actually do have an idea for a mundane story that takes several mundane stories that take place in the real world, some of which fill dearths that I don't think are there. I'd like to write a funny book about ADHD and
Mhm.
about ways to diagnose it, because I don't think there are that many funny books in fiction about it. I read a serious book that I thought was going to be funny, but instead it was talking about the history of unfair standards in the US, and I'm like, ah, dang it, this title was misleading. It was well written, just very depressing. And I'm like, I feel you need a funny book about it, whether you're a kid or an adult, so that it can make you feel easier about the fact that your brain just decides to strike on you and it doesn't even have any union demands. So if your brain's going to unionize, they should at least have some demands, like
Mm.
rest some more or drink water.
Yeah.
So I do want to write about that someday, and I'm currently working on a dystopia inspired by the Hunger Games, but it's also going to be talking about survivalism. So I'm reading some books on how you can do foraging in the wild and in the mountains. I've learned recently that moss is a good source of hydration because moss collects water and most species are edible for humans. So
Mhm.
I do so at least that's something I was able to put in, and I can't wait to put other stuff in.
I
Like
will. I will mention once the dystopian thing is out. That's already better than the Hunger Games. And if you say otherwise, that is wrong. because Priya here is smart and she knows that love triangles are the devil when it comes to stories like that.
What? No,
in
they're
defense to
great.
Suzanne Collins, she was mandated to put that in. Gail was originally Katniss's cousin.
I
Mm.
don't care. It is still there. But okay, okay. Hunger Games is a topic for another day.
You,
But
you have
Maybe for
spoke.
like the 10th anniversary or something.
maybe we can do this. I mean, whatever. We'll talk about it one day.
Well, you spoke a bit on topics you like to write about. Is there a particular genre you enjoy to write within?
I really like fantasy the most because I feel like in fantasy anything is possible. I do love horror. Horror is hard for me because I'm a bit of a wimp. So what's
Agreed.
so scary to me may not be scary to someone else. I mean, and for example, one thing I wrote about recently was about hospitals in the 2000s towards LGBTQ, because I admit I was righteously furious on learning that Jonathan Larson, the composer of Rent, could have been saved from his aortic rupture and been diagnosed if the hospital had bothered to do an exam on him that was beyond assuming he was a druggie. And
Mm.
so I'm super annoyed by that because John died when he was 35 on the premiere of Rent, actually. And afterwards, his family sued the hospital, receiving a settlement because he had gone several times, and each time they told him that it was nothing until he collapsed in his apartment. So I wrote a monologue about that based on the idea of how LGBTQ people would have to perform their pain to get standard health care. And I sent it off to the anthology, and the person said, "Great story, but I don't see how this is scary." And to me, it's utterly terrifying, the idea that you may not get health care because you may not look a certain way. But obviously, that may not be scary to someone else. I could try again, sending it to another horror anthology, but I'm also perfectly willing to accept if it's not scary.
Fair enough.
Mhm.
So let's see here. So Wolf, can I improvise the question? So next up is me. So anyway, you recently released a book, the book Understudies. We talked about it. We mentioned the name. So tell us a bit about it, since it's very recent.
Yes. So Understudies is a companion novel to the book Offstage Offerings. Both are set at a haunted theater, the Haunted Basilio Theater, that has been closed down for years but has recently opened up. And strange things happen. In this case, two acting troupe leaders, Stella and Evangeline, are trying to find an apartment to rent while going to grad school. And they are also trying to go and find a place for their theater group. So, a place that will rent for amateurs that perform mainly parodies of public works. And even though Stella is the responsible sister, Evangeline goes and decides to sign a contract with weird beings that promise free rent and theater space. All they have to do is give up a bit of their warmth every couple of days. But it's free rent. And all they have to do is perform a show that these stone figures have commissioned. So the show must go on, and then they'll be free of the contract.
Mhm. So let's keep it at that so that people won't
Very
know
interesting.
the
Very,
whole.
very feels very somewhat Fey inspired a little bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting. I love stuff like that. Like the
Yeah.
Fey
So
and Fey Wild type stuff is always like very fun because you can get so creative with things.
Mm-hmm.
So and as someone who read early versions and owns the final walk, really good story. Recommend it. Go buy it. Really, I am not just saying this because I'm biased. I swear to you, I usually say this is a joke, but like no, really, it's a good story. Go pick it up. So Wolf, you got the
Yeah.
next question.
Speaking of this particular story, is there anything specific that might have inspired it and inspired you to write
Team
it?
Star Kid. Team Star Kid, the theater troupe, inspired it, and they also came out with their most recent work and their return to the stage, Nerdy Prudes Must Die. Because
Which
Team
is an epic masterpiece that it's super dumb, but we love it.
It is. It's because Nerdy Prudes is part of their Hatchetfield franchise, which is a horror series with alternate timelines set in a small town up in the Midwest. So it's a lot of fun. It's very deconstructive and super violent, but it's also really funny. So when it
But
struck
what's
me,
important to note here is that Steam Starcades are essentially indie musical theater.
yep, they are because they're mainly crowdfunded. They have a Patreon and they raised money. They raise money for all their productions. And what struck me as interesting was Team Starkid started out as two brothers who are not twins, by the way, who started out just doing fun musicals for their college classmates. They started with a Harry Potter musical, which was a taste of what was to come because it is super ridiculous, showing Harry Potter as a jock, Draco Malfoy as secretly crushing on Hermione while planning to go into space to attend another magical academy, and Voldemort develops a relationship with Professor Quirrell, complete with a tap dance routine. So, and they went from that to Hatchetfield, which has some legit terrifying moments, such as
I want to also say that Tim Starkid made a musical called Holy Musical Batman, which was basically the Lego Batman movie, but like 4 years before.
Yep. And it is really funny. All of Team Star Kids musicals are up on their YouTube, so I would totally recommend you all go see them if you want to binge watch something funny.
Yeah,
And what's interesting
definitely.
is that they went from those musicals to Hatchetfield, and they explained after the troupe had split, with half staying in Chicago and the other half going to Los Angeles, that they realized they couldn't be doing parodies forever. While it was their brand, they had to figure out what they wanted to do that was their own. And they did do an original comedy musical called Firebringer, which is fun and very meme worthy. But they
If you, on that note, if you ever came across that I don't really want to do the walk today meme, that's from that musical.
Yep. And it is a big mood. It's even funnier in context, but even without context, it's hilarious. And Hatchetfield was an interesting direction to take to go into horror comedy, especially since they started with the smaller troupe. And I found what could have inspired that shift. So a lot of Teen Star Kid went into Stella and Evangeline, as well as the parody musicals they do. So I had to do Googling to find out what already wasn't being parodied. Originally, they were going to do a Hunger Games parody, but then I Googled and found out someone already did a Hunger Games parody musical. So I went, damn it.
No.
And that's why.
Okay.
And that's why.
But so as much as I like, talking about Tim Starkey, they are the ones who inspire the understudies. Like
Yep.
the idea of an indie theater, group.
Yep. And what could inspire the change? Though obviously Team Starkid hasn't made any deals, they've earned their merits fair and square through their love of the audience and their willingness to try new things.
Indeed. So next question: how personal is understudy to you? Compared to other stuff you have out there.
I think one thing is it's the first time it was a little less personal because it's the first time I had to write with protagonists that are not necessarily smart. Because in Offstage Offerings, the first book, the main character is pretty smart in that she's hired at the summer camp for theater kids. And the reason why she doesn't leave when the red flags start up is there are logical explanations. Oh, an employee didn't show up. He got fired for being insubordinate. Kids are kind of losing their way. Kids are kind of having conflict. It's summer camp. You're going to have conflict. So there's always a logical explanation. And that she actually does something when she gets proof that something is wrong. So that's Vivian, who also makes a cameo in this book. But here I had to establish that even though Stella and Evangeline are fairly smart, given, they're going to grad school and all, Evangeline doesn't think things through because she's obviously impulsive. And that's one thing that inspires most of the action, that Stella tries to clean up her sister's messes, but not very well, because Evangeline got in over her head. The main conflict is that when these people offer the contract, Stella says, fine, let's get it to our lawyers, because even if you're dealing with supernatural beings, you want to check fine print. But Evangeline signed it pretty much without reading the minute she saw free rent. Understandable, but also not very smart. And it turns out if the contract is broken, her life is forfeit. So Stella is obviously having to compromise and trying to figure out how to break this contract without sacrificing her sister. It was definitely harder doing that, to write about a protagonist who would make bad decisions, even if it was for the right reasons. So it is less personal. And obviously I haven't been in a theater troupe, so I did have to do some research about that, about how it would go. And I did a Team Star Kid binge watch for inspiration on the lyrics that are put in original lyrics, by the way, as well as how the auditions go.
Fair enough. Wolf, what do you have to ask?
Yeah, what is your expectation from this book and your reaction for it?
Or, I have no.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I have no expectations right now because the first draft of the story was rejected by a Nerving press before it was picked up by Horace. And so I'm hoping, one thing people said about book one is they said it didn't have enough monsters in it because it's a slow burn. And I thought, okay, and it wasn't violent enough. And I said, okay, I'll put more monsters in it, and I'll make it a little more violent with a higher body count. And so that's why it's a little darker than the first book. But I'm hoping that people do love it, and that they have emotional connection with it, with this deal with the devil, so to speak.
I love the idea personally, just hearing about it already.
Thank you.
Again, I enjoy fae, fae stuff like that, that kind of fae stuff, where it's like, hey, here's a deal, and we're asking for this seemingly benign thing, but then it's not. I love seeing how people play with ideas like that. So personally, the idea already intrigues me. So,
thank you. I am kind of grateful that currently Understudies is not on Goodreads, though it is on Amazon, because it means people can't review it. And obviously, reviews right now are for the reader and not for the author. But it does ouch the ego a bit when you see a 1-star review saying this wasn't what I was expecting for book one.
Yeah. Well, but at the same time, don't blame the book for what it is and not being what you wanted it to be.
Yeah.
I do have a question for those of us like myself and our listeners who might be getting into your stuff for the first time. Looking at Understudy specifically, you talked about how it's a sequel after Offstage Offerings. Absolutely, people should go and buy all of your books and read everything you've written. But for anyone getting into it, is Understudy something they can read standalone, or would you recommend they read Offstage Offerings first?
I hope it does stand on its own, because the reason why I call it a companion and not a sequel is because it's a different cast of characters. No, it's fine. It technically is a sequel. I'm just being anal retentive.
If I may,
that's completely fair.
If I may, as someone who read both, it's kind of, Understudies is like the glass onion to the first one's Knives Out. Same universe, different story.
Okay.
mean, if Daniel Craig wants to be in the film adaptation, please.
Go for it.
Evangeline is an idiot. Okay, no, but let's.
Well, that
Let's
would be.
say-
I mean, that would be Benoit Blanc's assessment.
Yeah, that's the joke. That's the joke.
Yeah.
Well,
But yeah, ideally you won't need to read book 1 to understand book 2, because I wrote it to make sure Vivian, the main character of book 1, and one of her friends, Drew, does make a cameo in the second book, with Drew playing a more supportive role towards the end. But ideally, you won't need to know what happened, because it's just referenced in passing. And plus, Evangeline and Stella don't exactly know what happened, so they just know, okay, Strange Theater, free rent, we gotta get this show on.
well, but continuing off of that, since Understudies is kind of, a sequel spin-off, if you will, what's the difference between writing an original story from scratch and continuing with that same world, with that same setup?
It's one difference is you have to make sure your details are consistent. So I did actually have to reread book 1 because I wrote it back in 2020, and I wrote book 2 in 2022, give or take. So I was trying to make sure that I understood. I had tried to make sure that the details were consistent, and even if I could hand wave it as the theater appears different depending on who's there, I also want to remember. Okay, this is what the curtains look like, and this is what this area looks like. And so it's remembering the details are consistent. It does help that you don't have to create everything from scratch, but I think it's harder than, say, doing fanfic, where your nerd brain memorizes all these little details that the author may have forgotten, and you can incorporate them into your fanfic. Because, unfortunately, it's harder for authors to be fans of their own work, because you also have to view it as a process.
Yeah, and then there's also the very moral question of, can I be a fan and a friend at the same time?
I mean, I'm sure you can be.
Well, that's just a joke question. I've heard somebody bring this up, so I'm like, because obviously, if you're a friend, you're a fan too. But yeah, you get it. But to go back to the question, what you usually say is, with a sequel, or something set in the same world, you have that extra work to do, which is remind yourself what the universe is like of consistency, basically.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't expecting to write a sequel. Otherwise, maybe I would have written up a Bible online. So I don't have enough headspace to write world-building Bibles. So who knows? If I were gonna write a full series or propose one, I would probably put like a world-building document online that's easily accessible, so I could say, okay, what do the wings look like? How is backstage? So if I were gonna write a history, I'd want to remember that.
So, Wolf, next question.
Yeah, you spoke a little of fanfic, so getting into that a little bit, you've written some in your past. What is, in your opinion, the main difference between writing a fanfic and an original work?
I think the main thing is, fanfic is going to be fun. You're already familiar with the world and you're writing it because of the joy of it. And the problem with original work is you're creating something out of nothing and it's all coming from you. And sure, you can brainstorm with people. You can work with online prompts and story generators, but don't use AI, because right now AI is being frowned upon in speculative fiction circles. And it's a good way to get an automatic ban from some places if you're submitting. But it also means it's all on you. With fanfic, you're not writing for a bunch of people, because it's when the pressure starts that you should stop writing the fanfic, because it should always stay fun. Whereas with an original work, there's always the question of, it's also a question if you're being a career writer or not. Are you going to be writing this to sell? Do you want people to like it? Do you want people to like your work? And I think that's always going to be a tough question. And not all people who write original works want to be published in a professional setting, or some self-publish, some just write for their friends, and some are slowly, tentatively exploring. And I think you always have to ask those questions. Whereas with fanfic, unless you're doing public domain stuff, or you're like doing something for fun, you're like, okay, I'm just gonna do this to be silly. Like April Fool's is coming up, and as a tradition, I always write a funny fanfic for it to
Mhm.
entertain people. Last year, I wrote about Hiccup from How to Train a Dragon being sick, and Toothless surprising him with a fish almost as big as he is, trying to make him feel better,
I
like cats
remember that. That
fights
was
for
funny.
their humans. So I often think about where is the fun, and I think that's always different. Obviously, you want writing to be fun, but the truth is that writing is not always fun, especially when you're writing original fiction. There are going to be moments where you're blocked and you start sweating, and you have to deal with that moment that you have to push through, or take a step back, put it aside, and talk it out with friends that you trust.
Right. So now we are gonna sum up this interview with some quick questions, quick answers, kind of thing. So, what is your favorite book?
Tough question. I'd have to say the one book that I'm trying to think of what I would always go back to reread. One that I've been rereading a lot is a graphic novel called Battle Royale about teens competing in a baking reality show with traps and tricks. And
Uh-huh.
that is a lot of fun. It's super funny. I don't know how legal it is because at some point the kids have to swing over a ring of fire to get to their ingredients. So I
I
am
don't know.
wondering,
Considering this setup, I don't think they really care about legal. It sounds like something they don't really aim for, but it
yeah,
sounds
well,
fun.
everything else is semi-plausible, like trapdoors in a three-legged race to get ingredients, because the trapdoors are harmless and all. It's the fire that concerns me. I feel like you'd want to do foam fire, but it is fun. Favorite author was, oh, I'm always going to say Neil Gaiman unless he breaks his pedestal, and he has
I
forbidden.
knew it. I knew it. I had that question in there because I knew this was gonna be the answer. Yes, correct.
Yes. So Neil Gaiman, fantasy author, creator of Sandman. After him would probably be Diana Wynne Jones, rest in peace, who was good at writing fantastic works that were also really funny and insightful about parenting.
So, since you already answered the favorite other question, Wolf, you take the one that's coming after.
Sure. Do you have any other hobbies that you partake in, like fun things you enjoy off to the side of writing?
Yes, I definitely enjoy reading a lot, though the enjoyment has
Fair.
gone down in what I review professionally. I also enjoy baking and experimenting with different types, though I still haven't figured out how to master a perfect souffle, which I hope to do one day. And I also go on walks, and I'm trying to take up yoga. If I sound winded, it's because I came from a vinyasa flow class that kicked my ass. So, so
Well,
yeah.
do your exercise, kids. I guess.
Yeah.
Uh, so, what would you say is one thing that no one knows about you?
I have extremely long toes, and my mom calls it knitting my toes, knitting them together. I've been able to do it since I was a kid. That I would fidget around by just lying them flat and then just overlapping them over each other.
Interesting. Wolf.
Yeah. What's your dream project? The one thing you
I,
would love to do?
I'd love to write a Goosebumps style story for an R.L. Stein anthology
Very
because
fair.
Goosebumps was one of the stories that convinced me that horror could be fun and for
Mm.
kids without shying away. And obviously, Goosebumps isn't good. Like, let's be honest.
Listen,
But
Goosebumps was like the goat back in the day. I
well,
get
it
it.
was basically what we had,
Yeah.
and the covers always remain creepy. Like there are some legitimately good stuff. The Ghost Next Door is actually a legitimately tragic story,
Yeah.
along with the Christmas anthology, which is hard to find. You can only find it for $100 now on eBay because people rediscovered it and it's out of print. So boo on that.
Uh-huh.
But I also would love to work on a story like that because Goosebumps is partly what got me into horror, and it'd be nice to say to write a story in that style that's decent because it's you could tell the Christmas anthology is fun, and I have read several of his modern anthologies where people have taken up the challenge, usually established authors. So if that does open up, it would be great. Otherwise, IP wise, it'd be great to write for Disney once and keep my copyright. Because don't be taking my copyright away unless you say it up front and to
Uh-huh.
protect those IPs.
Good luck with that.
Yeah, there's a
So,
certain battle going on now. Disney's trying to avoid paying Star Wars authors royalties because they bought out Star Wars before. Basically, that stuff.
Yeah. So basically, any inspirations you'd like to shout out before we close off, like either published authors or friends? Wink,
Well,
wink.
I'm right here on the podcast, who's always a good
Well, thank you. Always happy to be there. But if there are
Don't boost
anyone
his
else,
ego more.
because I don't count.
Don't boost
in
his
this
ego more.
particular-
He's already got a big enough head on this show.
Trust me, he doesn't. I actually told him
No.
to submit stuff.
Yeah.
And
Don't
she's a
you know
great
that
host.
his job is to make fun of me and keep
Listen,
me
I'll
in
give
check?
you this one. You're a great host, and I love hosting the podcast with you. That's all you
Oh,
get.
thank
That's the
you.
one. That's your one for like the rest of the year, man.
Yeah, like in 7 years, people. This is the only compliment he gave me ever.
Listen, after another 7 years, you'll get another one.
Yay!
So it'll be like a leap year?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's go with that. So besides me, which my pleasure. Do you have any other people you want to shout out?
Right, shout out to Stephanie, a very lovely woman.
Not me, but then she goes for my girlfriend. Thanks, Priya. all the people that relate to me. I promise you, I didn't pay her. I didn't pay her behind the scenes. I swear.
Trust me, trust me. And Eddie, but I also, in terms of my friends who are and aren't published, my friend Risa, evil writer, King of the Wilder West on Tumblr, but don't try messaging him now. Tumblr for Lent, and publish.
Okay, Haddock, been on the podcast as well.
Yeah. And Shauna McGuire, who is a delight to panel with. Also the Dread Machine editors, Neil Clark at Clark's World, who is an absolute sweetie, despite what the form letters may indicate when you're rejected in a day. And Sean from the Dark, who is also fun to work with. I mentor Terry Lee Ralph, all the people at Pep Scritches who have joined and who have managed to be decent and who have remained decent human beings. And that's my writer support group. And also my local nano group. And published author Valerie Valdez, who is also one of my mentors. And so there is so much fun. And there are lots of good people out there, both in and outside of writing, who have been lovely and supportive.
Awesome. So, Wolf, you are the final question.
Yeah. And finally, any tips you'd love to share to those who are listening that, those big tips that you think, absolutely that beginners need to have that you wish you would have had when you first started, or, something you think even people experienced might need to know, or would, you think should know?
I think first is that no writing advice is universal, and it's something I talked about in a panel yesterday. You have to find out what works for you, and that requires trying different styles. So people may say you have to write every day. I can tell you, you can work yourself up to that habit, but there may be a price for that, and that you can't switch off when you're trying to take a break from writing. And also, don't be afraid to listen to your mind and your body. Especially remember to stay hydrated and get enough sleep if you can, even if it's a sleepless time. And don't feel ashamed. And if you are working to get published, it's never going to be easy. In fact, one could argue it's not as easy now, because recently HarperCollins ended a strike with its people. And agents are slammed more with submissions. But always keep on top of it. Make a self-care plan based on what works for you. And definitely build that support system or find one that'll work for you. Because writing can be a lonely business, and that's why it's important to not be alone.
Very much agreed. So, I get anything else you want to say before we wrap up?
If anyone wants to submit to my publication, The Permanent Nerd Network, and you have something nerdy to say, just be sure to sign up for Medium and the Partners program and comment on the submission guidelines. It'd be great to hear people's insights on anime media or even niche topics such as say gardening or wood engraving.
All right, sounds good. So with that being said, that was it for this episode of the Outcast. We hope you enjoyed it. If you want to find Priya's other works and including the newly released understudies, you can do this in the links that are provided in the description below. And Priya, where can people find you and your work?
So people can find me at my website, priyasridhar.com, where I blog twice a month, sorry. And I also post on Medium, both under my account and the account The Permanent Nerd Network. And totally recommend you all go see that if you like food, because as mentioned, I do baking. I also have a Patreon. So if you want to get monthly recipes with sources, I'll also be happy to provide that.
Mm-hmm. Definitely all awesome stuff that you should check out. And on that note,
Mhm.
if you checked some of Priya's stuff and you want to let us know that you did, or you want to talk about it, you can tell us all about it in the comment section below, on our Tumblr, which is Berkcast Team, and on our Twitter, which is Berkcast with a capital B, capital C. So until next time, I was HC.
I was Wolf.
And I'm Priya.
And we will see you all next time. Take care.
Bye bye.